So I'd like to talk today about performance appraisals and maybe a few ideas around performance appraisals when managing people remotely. I think performance appraisals are generally really tricky. There's a lot that's kind of not right about them and a lot that's right as well, I suppose. I think that a performance appraisal highlights the relationship between a manager and a team member, whether that's a good relationship or not, or even if it's generally good and there's bits of it there's kind of something wrong with. I think all of it is highlighted in some way. So I think we need to be really mindful about that, and it is kind of preparing yourself and your thought processes before you go into an appraisal, whether you're the appraisee or appraiser. I think it also has the effect on a person of affecting how they feel. So if somebody feels like they're making great progress at work, or if they're bored, or whatever their experience of the work is, more around the kind of tasks and performance rather than the relationship, then I think it also, an appraisal meeting or conversation has that effect too. I think it highlights the feelings that the person has around their development or whatever. So there's a load of ideas that I've got that I'd like to share. Appraisals is pretty big, I think. So I'm just going to share a few ideas with you. It's not supposed to be an exhaustive list or anything like that, but I think maybe think about some of the behaviours that people come with. So I'd like to share a few ideas around some kind of good practice, some tips and ideas that you might be able to use, practical stuff really. So whether you're conducting an appraisal face to face, or whether you're doing it remotely over Teams or Zoom or something, I think one of the most key parts is preparation. I think we need to be prepared. I think if you're on the receiving end of the appraisal, the appraisee, then you need to have reflected on whatever time period that appraisal is for, often 6 months or 12 months or something like that. And oftentimes organisations have tools to help people to do that. And again, you've probably experienced that different people have different levels of engagement with that. I would guess really that if somebody's kind of not into the appraisal process, which is quite a lot of people have had a rubbish experience of it, then they might just disengage even at that point. So how do we, so way before the appraisal, how do we encourage people to get on board with it and to engage with it, even though they don't want to progress, or they don't like the appraisal process, or they don't like you as the manager, or they don't like, I don't know, something else, then there is a need to kind of insist people engage with that, I guess. But if we can do that in an encouraging way, and make it kind of easier and try and bring it to life for people, then that's key. And that's way before we've even got to the meeting. I think as a manager, in terms of preparing yourself, I think it's really important that you've got a sense of where the person is at. I think if you're going to do an appraisal with somebody, you need to know where they are, what's been going on for them over that time period, the sorts of things they might be interested in. They may not want to share that preparation tool with you, so it might not be as going as far as kind of asking them to submit something, although quite a lot of appraisal processes do have that sort of feature in them these days. But actually, just because you care and you want to understand and you want to know about them as a person. So like I mentioned earlier, I think because an appraisal highlights the relationship that you and they have, then I think there's lots of potential for being fake and pretending to be interested when you're not, or what have you. So I think it has to be authentic. And you can deepen that relationship, or at least make the appraisal less painful for the pair of you, if you have invested a little bit of time in trying to kind of understand that person, even if there isn't much relationship there. So from a preparation point of view for yourself, way before that, I think is about getting to know and understand the person, some aspirations. Maybe think about prepping some questions that you need to ask them or want to ask them as well. Other ideas in terms of preparation then would be, as the manager, as the appraiser, would be to think about what data and information that you need This is particularly important if you've got somebody who is quite defensive. They're going to come in and think that they come into the appraisal with the mindset that you're attacking them, or you're micromanaging or drilling down on detail of their performance, which you kind of are. And that's the nature of it quite often with appraisals. But if that's the overwhelming feeling and the response that that person's bringing is defensiveness, then I think it's reasonable to have an agenda and be able to kind of slow it down. So maybe plan the conversation the way you know, kind of step by step, the way you want to go through it, and kind of stick to that agenda. But also to have the information there, and maybe make the conversation more around the information and the performance data than it is purely about a kind of blaming, you know, kind of pointy finger type of conversation. So focus on the facts rather than the feelings, I guess. Although it's important to make sure you understand where they're coming from. So I don't mean kind of make it cold, but it is important to try and stay objective, as it were, with it, rather than somebody feeling attacked before you've even started. I think maybe just before the meeting, so that's kind of way before, just before the meeting, I think it's really important to understand where the person is and where you are. So, I mean, in terms of the physical environment and the setup, I would be saying the same thing if we were talking about appraisals face to face. So if you were going to do those, I would say, you know, think about the furniture, think about the noise and the temperature and the time of day and the amount of time that you've allowed, and when the person needs to leave, comfort breaks, refreshments, you name it. They all sound like really simple, basic things, but in actual fact, they're easy things to get right. But if you get them wrong, I think it's like most important meetings, presentations, whatever, I think it's all of the small things that you get right or wrong that will ultimately make it a 10 out of 10 or a 5 out of 10. So, you know, if you're trying to make these as good as you can, then I would say try and get as many of the small details right. So managing remotely, then, that means, where is that person at? Have they prepared, like I've already said? You know, have they got their reflections from the past year on the performance and the figures in front of them? Have they got their development needs? But also, in terms of the physical environment, have they, and are they even able to create an environment at home, let's say, that is conducive to this conversation? So are they trying their best to eliminate problems or interruptions, or, you know, it's difficult if the door's going or whatever, but, you know, there's no need to have the washing machine on, and you can turn notifications off on your devices, and you can, you know, turn the ringer off on your phone and have your laptop out of the way, or if you've got to have the laptop there, then have the relevant things kind of open. So they all do sound like quite small details, but prepare. And if you've got people that you kind of know them well enough that they're not likely to prepare well in that regard, then I don't know, if it's not too much, then send them a checklist or send them a few reminder emails without wanting to kind of hound them or anything. But try and again sort of insist that the small things count in a positive way when setting themselves up for this stuff. Having done a lot of appraisals in the past myself, I think sometimes in terms of the person being prepared, you quite often don't know what's gone on in someone's life earlier that day or the day before or whatever. And particularly given the nature of why we're managing people remotely, you know, thinking about the pandemic and working from home, and maybe post-pandemic people continuing to work from home. If you're in an office, you know what's happened to them, or you're more likely to have a sense of where they're at today or yesterday or whatever. But if people are working from home, you've got less exposure to them, and therefore you don't know if somebody's been taken ill the day before, or you know, they've just taken their pet to the vet or something like that. So I think it's really, really important to try and connect with the person just for a few minutes, and just try and get a sense that they're in a comfortable place for themselves, as well as, you know, in a reasonable enough environment at home. So they're the kind of big ones for me. So have an agenda, I mentioned. thinking about the relationship and preparing yourself. If we then move into the conversation itself, the appraisal conversation itself, then there's quite a bit of research that's been done around this, and I look at a lot of that, I guess, so you don't have to. The ratio, something that comes up quite a lot, is a sort of ratio of talking to listening with the appraiser. So I think that's quite a big deal. Often it doesn't go this way, but I think it should be about the appraiser, the manager, asking questions, open questions, if you need to ask open questions to allow the conversation to flow. And if you don't know the difference between open and closed questions, then do look it up or contact us. And we'll share that with you. But essentially those wide open questions to allow the person to talk, how they feel, how they thought things went, like highs and lows of the year and so on. And it should be, like I've already said, stuff that they've prepared. So in addition to asking open questions, in order to open the conversation up and to allow it to flow a little bit more, I think that's probably a really useful technique, particularly if somebody's quite quiet. I've tended to find, while people are quite quiet in an appraisal, maybe because of their personality type or because, I don't know, for whatever personal reason, same as face-to-face really, I think, but again, sort of remotely, it's highlighted even more that if somebody's quite quiet in a conversation in a room, then they're probably likely to be even quieter on a remote conversation. So again, even more need to ask open questions and get people to open up. The other thing I find with appraisals, and particularly I think if people are quite quiet, is given that you've done lots of prep and you understand maybe what the reason is for them being quiet and they just don't want to talk to you and they don't want to open up or whatever, and maybe, you know, maybe you've had to dig a little bit deeper to kind of understand why that's the case, but maybe, like I've just mentioned, that is that person's personality, then that's great. You know, that's fine. We just need to be a bit more patient and allow them a bit more time. As somebody who does a lot of group training and facilitating, you know, kind of online and also, you know, there in the room, it's about how quickly you do or do not jump in. And it's the same when you're conducting a performance appraisal. Just hold the silence, you know, just allow that silence to not be too awkward. You know, if it's gone to like sort of 30 seconds, it's probably got awkward. You know, one of you is going to have to say something. But actually, if you just allow a few extra seconds before thinking it's got awkward, or before your mind wandering, or before your eyes sort of defocus or whatever, then I think that's really important. As the manager, you're the one role modeling, and you're the one holding the kind of energy, I would say, holding the rapport and the tone and the level of that conversation. And so if you're bored or miserable or, you know, kind of looking away or distracted, then it's not going to go very well, is it? So again, remotely, I think I've already mentioned it, but just distractions and anything like that, knocks at the door, phones, you know, just put those things out of the way so they're not even in front of you. If you're trying to have that first bit of the conversation, which is about, you know, tell me how your year's gone, or, you know, what's been the highlights and lowlights of your year, and you know, that, and it's a conversation to begin with. So don't interrupt, listen, ask open questions, and just take the time and allow the silence, I would say. Another thing that comes up face-to-face, remotely, either really, is people who are bored in their role. And there's a number of different people, a number of different responses to being bored in your role. So it might be the fact that the person, I don't know, they're more capable of the job, but actually for whatever personal reasons, family, whatever, then they're just going to do that. So it might be that they've got more potential, but they don't want to develop. I think maybe it's about because you're boring, or maybe it's because the appraisal process is boring, or maybe it's because there aren't the opportunities and so on. So dealing with people who are bored, again, I think you need to drill into what's driving that boredom. Why is that person understimulated in the workplace? Is there something that you or they need to do about that, basically? Is there more training? or if there isn't a budget for training, then is that the problem? Or are they not being given enough responsibility? You've got to bear in mind, as a manager, as an appraising manager, their performance is your responsibility, and so is their motivation, really. So if someone's not motivated in their role, is that okay? Are they still productive? Are they still a great member of the team? Or actually, are they disengaged? In which case, that's a whole nother kind of conversation, really. So how do we engage people? And to give you the short answer, that's about the relationship. It's about the praise and encouragement, the way the work's organised and so on. And that's all within the manager's remit to deal with. So yeah, take ownership for that yourself, really. Going on to that, again, people not taking ownership, different to boredom. Sometimes occasionally you get a team member that just won't take responsibility for their own performance. Non-stick people, Teflon people. So that one in an appraisal is about having the facts in front of you, for me. And I don't know that that's necessarily highlighted remotely. I think that goes back to being well prepared and asking the person to be prepared. And if they are not. So I've taken, in the past, frankly, I've taken quite a tough line on this. It's that person's appraisal. If I've done everything I possibly can to encourage that person and inspire them and engage them and make sure that they turn up prepared, and then they turn up to the appraisal not prepared, then I'm not doing it. I just won't do it. I don't think there's any point. It's slow, it's difficult, it's unprepared. It doesn't need to be like that. And so I'd rather be reassuring and encouraging and so on. But if there are a number of ways of people getting out of taking ownership or responsibility, maybe for a mistake or for something, a piece of work or a task or a project or something that they don't want to do, then again, that is something that you need to cover. And so I think in the appraisal, that's the time where you need to be brave and actually have those actual conversations and pin people down to their performance about what they need to do or what they need to do better or differently or what have you. And if that person's always blaming the traffic or the weather or, you know, some other department or some other team or something, then you can use questions to help them, closed, very focused questions, to bring the conversation back to them. So for example, by asking questions like, but let's talk about your performance. You know, what did you do in this particular instance? You know, let's talk about an example and what did you do? And then if they jump into sort of blaming and finger pointing or what have you, you can say, okay, what about what other people are doing, but what did you do? How did you respond? Or what was your thought process? Or what could you have done differently or what have you? So it becomes like a bit of a coaching conversation where you're driving consistently towards ownership and them owning it, and that can be quite tough, can be quite tiring as well. But you know, do your best. So it helps to be prepared, have the notes, have an agenda to stick to, you know, insist people are prepared, and then try and keep them on track and focused in the conversation on their own performance, basically. And then finally, what about people who get upset? So another way that people sort of get out of things quite well sometimes in appraisals and maybe at other times is tears. People who get upset or they get a bit sort of teary or something like that. I think that, like I said right at the start, I think appraisals are really stressful. They highlight everything that's wrong with a person's day and week and year, and hopefully what's right as well. But sometimes, because of highlighting that, people are going to get upset. And if you're going to be talking and reviewing what somebody's done badly in the past, then it's very likely that somebody's going to get upset, or they might feel hot, or they might feel just you know, kind of some collection of emotions and physical response and so on. If somebody cries at that point, then that's kind of okay, you know, just allow that person a little bit of space and time. And sometimes people cry when they've done really well and you give them lots of compliments. So that's kind of okay, you know, outbursts of emotion, it's a real conversation and you're having you know, you're both real people and that's all right. The one I'm thinking of more though is where people are a little bit gamesy and they use tears in order to avoid a conversation. So they know that if they get upset and they cry, you're going to back down and you're not going to have the conversation that you need to have. That's not really fair in terms of what they're doing, but they might be trying to kind of press some buttons in order to get a particular sympathetic response or for you to back down or what have you. In that instance, again, I think you could take a break, or you could just allow the person to go and get a drink of water or a bit of space and say to them, look, you're clearly getting upset. It wasn't my intention to upset you, but we do need to have this conversation. You know, it's important that we review this stuff as well as the good stuff, and stick to it. Don't upset people even more, but do stick to your guns and do make sure you have that conversation. So I hope you found that useful. I think the remote stuff highlights things even more. So it's really just a case of making sure you're extra prepared and extra tuned in. Obviously, you need to make sure that the technology works and you've got the, power and all the rest of it. But otherwise, really similar to face-to-face. So I hope some of these tips have been useful for dealing with difficult conversations and dealing with appraisal conversations remotely. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to like and subscribe this video.